Hey there, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Evoke Greatness. This podcast was created for those of you who, like me, are driven by their curious nature and fascination with the champion mindset. If you have an insatiable hunger for growth and knowledge, or maybe you're just curious on how some of the most successful people have navigated their journey, we share the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, and all the lessons learned along the way. It doesn't matter what chapter you are on in your story. Maybe you're just getting started, or heck, maybe you're halfway through. What I know is where intention goes, energy flows. It's my most sincere hope that you will hear something in one or maybe many of these episodes that resonates with you and reminds you that you are not in this alone. As we venture into year 2, I hope that you find a sense of connection and community when you're here, because we all deserve a place where we belong. My name is Sunny, and I am so glad you're here. If you're new, there's a few things you want to know about me. I am a huge book nerd and a wee bit of a control enthusiast with an obsession for motivational coffee cups. I believe that a rising tide raises all ships, and I invite you along in this journey to evoke greatness. Welcome back to another episode of Evoke Greatness. We are stepping into part 2 here of Command with Courage with my guest, Scot Heathman. And a little recap for anyone who might have missed part 1, which is episode 104. So make sure you go back and listen to that. And this will meld right in and really be a compliment to episode 104. Again, a recap. Scot is a retired Air Force colonel who has led thousands of people in his career. He's taken all of his years of wisdom and experience and poured them into creating his company as the founder and CEO of Elevating Others, where he inspires CEOs and frontline leaders to command with courage so that they too can unleash the force within their team, ignite their innovative spirit, and skyrocket their bottom line. Scot, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
I knew I couldn't. I told Scot, I'm like, would you be open to a part 2? Because there were things that I wanted to ask that there just wasn't enough time for. And so I feel like we got a lot of great stuff out of episode 1 or out of part 1. And now we're diving back to go a little deeper in part 2. And so one of the things that I love to ask people who have had such success and greatness as you have in your career is, what's been the most powerful lesson that you have had that maybe seemed like a failure or a misstep in the moment? You know, those things that are like super painful, yet on the other side of it is something absolutely impactful and transformative. What comes to mind when you think about that?
You know, this is going to seem very small, and I'm glad you kind of prefaced that. It might be something small, right? You know, when you said that, I could see this situation playing out again. I was probably 2 to 3 year captain. So I'd promoted to captain and, you know, was getting more senior in that rank. And I can remember I was given a position as an assistant director of operations. So as you would think in the military, we're running flight operations, and I'm not the director of operations, but his assistant. And we were trying to figure out how could we reduce the sequence of events that when a pilot shows up for a sortie or a mission to go fly an airplane, you know, there's a couple hours worth of different things we got to get done. You know, we show up, we got to get all of our life support equipment. We got to pick up our intelligence, get briefings. We have to go get weather briefs. And then we have to actually have our crew pre-briefed. There's just a lot of time spent. And we were trying to figure out ways that we could shave, you know, minutes here and there so that we could get that sequence down to something that's, you know, really tight so that we didn't have to spend so much time on the ground and we can get on doing our business. And one of those areas where we could shave time was we could move a lot of the life support equipment over to base operations, which is where we have to go to get our weather briefs and some of our communications gear. And if it was over there, well, then we could kind of just starburst and, you know, hey, loadmaster, you go this way, you go pick up that, go get our helmets, I'll get our weather brief, so we can not spend all this time traveling from point A to point B to point C. And I was working with the operational support squadron, which are the folks that handle the life support gear. And there was a chief master sergeant who was in charge of a lot of the life support gear as far as the handling of it, making sure the airmen are taking good care of it and everything's locked up and properly stored and all that. And it seemed to me like he was being this big friction in us reducing the sequence of events. And I didn't have much of a relationship with him. I knew who he was, but we didn't really know each other at all. We never talked outside of this initiative to kind of reduce the time. And we're conversing mostly over email. And it's kind of this back and forth. Now, I outrank him, for those that don't understand the rank and structure here. But this chief has been in the military probably, 20 to 30 years. I don't remember, how long they were in, but, and I've been in the military, about 6, so I'm at one point in the conversation, I could tell like he was being kind of this stick in the mud about trying to do this. And I've been told by my commander, we got to get this done. And I was basically using my commander's language, my boss's language, to kind of forcefully influence, the atmosphere here, right? And I had sent him somewhat of a very direct email. And I remember, later on when I went back and read it, yeah, it didn't have any colorful language, but it certainly was not the most respectful email. It was very passive aggressive and all that. And so I sent this email and I hit enter and I walked away going, all right, this guy's going to definitely change now. Well, a couple hours later, my boss came back, who's a lieutenant colonel, squadron commander. And he said, hey, Scott, can I see you in my office just for a couple minutes? I'm like, yeah. So I go in and I say, hey, what's up, boss? He goes, hey, that email that you sent to Chief, we'll call him Smith, Chief Smith, what did you expect to get out of that? And I said, well, I expected us to get to, reduce the time and get us to the point where we can move everything over and yada, yada, yada. And he goes, well, I happen to have the email right here. And he had it printed out. Oh. And he said, yeah, Chief and I had a long discussion about your email. And we both came to the conclusion that you probably didn't need to write that because what I didn't know was my squadron commander was actually in the chief's office when I hit send on that email. And he was already working this deal, but he was meeting face to face, having coffee, breaking bread. And here's this very front-leaning, precocious, 6-year captain thinking like it's my way or the highway. And I hit send. And I tell you what I learned from that was an Abraham Lincoln lesson. And what Abraham Lincoln used to do when he would write a letter, maybe he was upset, he would write the letter, but he would never send it. He would open his drawer and he would put it in the drawer. And then he'd write the letter that probably is far more appropriate to send. Like maybe he was, relieving one of his commanders, but he still did it with respect, right? He still did it without being different than who his own personality was. And that taught me the lesson of, one, if you're going to type an email, never do it when you're angry. Or if you do it, hit print, read it, and then put it in the drawer and never send it. And then retype the email and, when you're in a much better state of mind. But two, also the value of relationships. I had not invested in that relationship at all. And I was actually in a position to be the first person to instigate that investment. And I never did. And, from that point on, I said, I am never going to send an email like that to someone that I've never talked to on the phone before, or at least had a cup of coffee with. I mean, certainly we get upset and we get angry, but when you're friends with somebody, you can get over that kind of stuff and probably understand what you're both dealing with. But for someone that I didn't even give a chance to get to know, that was so unprofessional. And that honestly set me up for a lot of life lessons that I would learn in leadership for, the next 15 years plus. That every relationship matters and you should spend the time to getting to know someone rather than just trying to always ask for something from them.
You mentioned forcefully influence. I love that because it makes me reflect back on, I've been in that same position. I've done that same thing where I really thought this is the right thing. And I'm going to confidently hit send on this
Yeah.
in that moment when maybe I'm a little more driven by my ego, or I'm a little more driven by the principle of feeling right. And I think those emotions can really drive us. And of course, that's the beauty of wisdom. The beauty
Yeah.
of wisdom is that over time and over making these mistakes and just, maybe errors in judgment, we can
No,
fine
certainly.
tune, or polish ourselves to handle situations differently. But for those young leaders listening, that is I do that regularly, whether it be a text, whether it be, you type it out and then you delete it, or you type the email out, you delete it, like print it, look at it, throw it in the garbage, feel like I got that out, that element of venting or releasing, and then come back to the place of what would my best self do in this situation, right? My
Yeah.
calm, confident best self. And I think that changes our responses quite a bit. But I love that
Hmm.
story.
It totally does. I mean, if you have a slight bit of hesitancy, you should not send that email.
Right.
Like, never send it, because that's your body telling you something's off here. And save yourself, those 5 seconds of pause there from what could be hours, days, months of a relationship gone bad. So to me, you're almost fixing potential problems that you're not even aware of upstream by not sending it, versus if you did send it. Now I'm dealing with my boss. Now I'm dealing with a chief who doesn't respect me. And oh, by the way, that chief could have very easily went and told everybody else in their organization about how to deal with Captain Heathman.
Right.
I wouldn't deal with him, or he goes and gets his boss. And now it's this big ordeal when all I needed to do was take a step back, think about what I was doing. I'm not the boss. I was just asked to go perform a task. But what was in my head was, I'm going to perform this to the best of my abilities, get it done quick, and I don't care who's in my path,
Right. Right.
So,
Another thing that you touched on was recognizing the investment in relationship or lack thereof. And I think that too is something that maybe earlier on in our careers or lives, we don't see the value in, or we don't really recognize the investment, but truly the investment in a relationship could have changed that dynamic.
oh, absolutely. And I think there are probably two things at play there. On the more self side, it's the emotional intelligence piece of it, right? Understanding social awareness and relationships. Obviously, again, having the self awareness to go, yeah, I'm not in a good state. I probably shouldn't send this letter. That probably flows into some self management as well. But so very high EQ, someone with high EQ would recognize that's not the right place to be for me. And then also somebody with cultural intelligence, understanding the behaviors that are at play here in the organizational environment, definitely not something that we need to do here. Because again, if I don't have awareness of all of our individual behaviors and how we could potentially react, I'm going to hit send every time and not even realize the damage that I'm doing. So I think it's almost a combination of those two skills, both from an awareness of self and awareness of the organization, what could potentially happen. There's where you could save, I think, again, days, months of drama, interpersonal violence, if you will, within an organization that many organizations suffer from. And then next thing you know, that all bleeds down to people showing up in the parking lot, not even wanting to walk in the door, right? It all has an effect.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect. And I love how you made the distinction between emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence. And I'm curious, how do you think cultural intelligence can elevate a leader's abilities? And what steps can leaders take to have a better understanding around like strategies for managing diverse teams, which that exists everywhere. It's not just a military thing. It's not just a civilian thing. It exists everywhere. How do we better handle and navigate those relationships with cultural intelligence?
Yeah. So on the CQ side, the cultural intelligence side, you said a very key word there, and it is a key component, is diversity is an asset. And so you need to understand that first and foremost. I don't know what I don't know. Even if I'm talking to somebody that may have grown up in the same neighborhood as me, their environment may still be radically different than mine. Or if we're not the same color or the same race or nationality, we actually still may be thinking alike though. Like, so again, what I think a leader needs to do to understand this kind of key of using diversity as an asset is you got to be opening to listening and asking questions. And there can be a lot of fear, I think, for leaders when it comes to asking questions. And, it's something you have to practice. You don't get good at it unless you practice. What does it look like in everyday life? It could be something like you and I pass each other in the hallway. And instead of saying what's up and nodding and we just keep walking by, hey, Sonny, how's your day going? Tell me something good that's happened today. That's it. That's it. Couple things I've just done there. One, I've paused us from walking by and acknowledged you, and hopefully you acknowledge me the same way. But now I've also elicited an open-ended question where you can't just say yes or no or everything's fine. You actually now have to talk to me. But I've asked you of that so it doesn't feel as intimidating, right? Like, tell me something good that's happening today. It could be, hey, I got to work on time. It's been tough having the kids drive me crazy every morning. That may be a huge deal to someone. Or it may be, I got a great workout in this morning and I'm trying to, lose weight. And, oh, tell me more about that. That's another question that leaders, I think, need to have in their arsenal. Tell me more. Tell me more. And then I think probably the best question that leaders can ask is to say the words, I don't know. What do you think? Or, I don't know. What's your opinion on this? Too many times, I think leaders are trying to fill the space and not elicit input or perspective from others. And I don't know is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of you're inclusive with your audience here, with your teammates. So there was no way in the world that being a commander of an Air Force base that I knew it all. There's no manual, just like a mayor of a city doesn't have a book to reference, Yeah, you got some mentors that probably have done it before that you can lean on, but my time in command is different than the previous commanders. My time in command had COVID. The previous commander did not even have to deal with that. Completely different set of dynamics involved. And so when people start asking you things like, well, how are we going to operate now under COVID? Or how are we going to do this? I think it's okay. And I said it many a time. I don't know, but I think if we spend some time working through this, gather some inputs, maybe we can figure out a way through this. I used to say it was funny too. During COVID, everybody was always looking up for answers. They're looking to the base commander, and the base commander is looking to the numbered Air Force commander, all the way up to the president, right? And I kind of noticed this trend. And one day I just said, we got to stop looking up because there's nobody alive during the last pandemic that's in our chain of command right now. And kind of once I threw that on the table, then people started being a little bit more open about, maybe I don't have all the answers. And maybe we need to get a team together from all shapes and sizes to help us figure this out. So diversity is an asset, effective communication. We kind of walked through that, which is some of the things that I've been talking about here. But then I think being very adaptable because of the behaviors that we all bring into work each and every day. Your mood's going to change about every 90 seconds, right? So how many times or how many emotions are you going to have in a given day? Thousands. If you're not an adaptable leader, being able to adapt to the different behaviors going on, you're kind of going to get stuck in certain situations, or you may not be in a position to pick up on some key things within communication, such as nonverbals that actually might be giving you more of the message than what I'm actually saying. UCLA ran a study and they said we pick up about 70% of our conversation just through the nonverbals. The rest of it's the the way it was said and what's said. That's what we remember. But we remember the nonverbals and all this information that a person gives off where they're communicating with us. So, which is why it's important, I think, to at least under a COVID environment, we need to still find a way to see each other's faces, whether that be through a Zoom call, or we need to find a way to be able to get together in some small groups and still keep our distance and talk with one another. It's not a time to just go to our corners and never see people, because it just ain't going to work. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. Those are excellent takeaways to be able to put into the tool belt of leadership and navigating just diverse groups and having a willingness to be open, to be curious, to not have to have all the answers. Any wise leader will tell you those are some of the key tools to put in your tool belt, right? That allows for people to really want to follow you, to follow your vision and be willing to go to the ends of the earth for you. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I've certainly seen it in some of the leaders that I've spent time around with that I really admire. Boy, they didn't even hesitate to say something like, I don't know, I don't have an answer on that. But I may have somebody that we can bring into our next meeting that might have some answers. And more often than not, it was somebody very low on the food chain, right? And so now you're bringing in the art of reverse mentoring and having that young officer enlisted or civilian who probably is the expert, bring them into the room, bring them into the meeting. Don't bury them in the corner of the organization, but pull them out. And you're doing two things. Not only are you showcasing the talent within your organization, you're building confidence in that person now, that they actually have value. And now they feel it and something changes inside, something positive changes inside of them when you do that.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. How have you balanced being a leader who is vulnerable in a world where maybe men aren't always given the space to do so?
Yeah. That's such an interesting question because it tends to go back to male versus female all the time, right? More often than not, tends to go back to, well, they're far more open with their emotions. But I tell you, I'm a lot like Dick Vermeil, who used to be the coach for the Rams. And if you ever seen Dick Vermeil talk after a game, especially a very tough game or playoff game, he would get very emotional talking. I'm very much like him. It doesn't take a whole lot for me to show my emotions, to shed a tear. And I think to a degree, it still potentially bugs me a bit because I want to make sure that I'm still kind of staying locked in. But, my wife reminds me like, that's okay. You're human, right? It's what sets us apart from the animal kingdom. Not that animals can't show emotions, but they don't have the range we do. And even if good things happen, it's still okay to get emotional about it. And gosh, I think there's this persona in the military. I don't think Hollywood's doing us any good justice on this, that everybody's got to be a tough guy or a tough girl to operate in the military, or you can't have emotions. You got to check them at the door, right? It couldn't be further from the truth. I think when you're being put in harm's way, or you're the leader asking and putting people in harm's way, I want leaders who actually have some emotions, because I want them to understand how serious this is. When I would sign deployment orders, I'm not just thinking about, oh yeah, I gotta, they need to be there next Thursday and they're going to be gone for 9 months. Sign, ready to break. I'm thinking about their mom and dad, kids, spouses, how are we going to take care of the family? Boy, that's emotional. And it's okay. So I like I said, I think there's just this stigma out there that men in the military can't be emotional. But I think for every person that says that, I'll show you 10, and I'll show you 10 special forces folks who show emotion. Some of the toughest people on the planet absolutely show emotion. And I think what allows them to be so good at their craft is that they show emotions. Because if you don't bring those things to the surface, I don't think you have good awareness of it. I think you might be suppressing some things, which will actually hinder your performance overall. And so anytime I held some emotion with me inside of me, I would take a moment. And it's a skill. It's something you need to practice. It's strategies that you need to work on. I would hold those emotions and say, why am I feeling this way right now? What is it that provoked this? Can I use this emotion as an asset, or is it to my disadvantage right now? Now, those questions are being asked in my head very, very quickly because, again, I practice this stuff, but I can get to a point where probably not a good place to show it right now based on maybe what we're talking about. But in a different environment, yeah, absolutely necessary, because I need to model this so that others can feel comfortable, displaying their vulnerability.
Well, and I appreciate you almost busting that myth, right? Because it is oftentimes those who aren't in the military, we're left to either kind of the story we create, what we see on TV, what we see on the news, what we see in movies. And so I love that. And I think that's foundational too for a strong leader, is having that sense of that emotional intelligence. And
Yeah.
being in touch with your emotions is key for being able to have emotional intelligence.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like, you watch the nightly news, pick whatever network. You often will not see a motion come out of the anchor, but the really good ones, they're not afraid of it. Like, they'll let
Right.
it. And how could you not, with all the stories, especially the tough stories that are out there? Something's going to hit, something's going to resonate, and I think some of the best anchors that we've seen in our past or even today, they absolutely will show emotion. It's not to drive ratings. It's because they're human. And I think for a leader, when you're able to show that you're more than just a boss, you're human. Now your people have an instant connection. And that's, to me, the basis of trust, where that comes from, or where that could really grow and foster is, I now see you and you're like me too. I felt bad about that too. Now we have something that we can share in common, right?
Brings that sense of humanity back to a situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, as we wrap up, I'm curious, what has been the most impactful advice you've been given in your life?
Oh, you know, there was, again, going all the way back to when I was a captain. I can remember we had a commander who invited us over to his house, all of us flight commanders, and he gave us this book called Fish. And it's about the fish market in Seattle. It's a leadership story, but there were like kind of four tenets in there, and I kind of took those four tenets and started incorporating those, into my life, and I kind of created my own mantra out of it. But there were things like make their day, have fun, be bold, those kinds of things. And from that book, I kind of set myself up with a mantra of being present, be bold, be innovative. And I don't think, had I not received that book and just saw that leadership can be broken down very simply into things like having fun and making people's day and being bold, I don't know if I would have been as effective as I would wanted to be. And so that probably doesn't really answer the question as far as like particular advice, but it was more of an action
I
that
was going to say it was an act
it was
that
yeah.
influence. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, call it an act of kindness because he invested in us. And, from that point on, I had I had the mantra on my mug, my squadron mug that said, be present, be bold, be innovative. And I say that every day because I'm looking for ways to be right there with people and holding them in empathy, being present. That's to me what being fully present is. Being bold, which means, boy, I have fears in my life, but trying to just go one more step, just see if I can push it a little bit. I might be able to break through some of those fears and maybe see what other fears are behind that one. And then to be innovative, I think goes back to a little bit of the cultural intelligence pieces. it's not about inventing new ways to do things, but sometimes taking existing capabilities and putting them together in a different way to see what else you can do, being adaptable for a given environment. There's so many things in life which people struggle to figure out how to maneuver through. I am more interested, how did the positive deviant work their way through this? How did that person figure it out if the 50 other people didn't? And so to me, I don't think they get there if they're not a little bit bold or innovative to look at it from a different perspective. And more often than not, it wasn't just them. It was probably a group, a team looking from different perspectives and figured out how to rewicker things. And now they figured out a way through this mess. I kind of use the phrases, well, this is the way we've always done it. I'm like, hold my beer. You know what? You tell me that phrase. Okay, the fight's on, because I hate that phrase. And I may fail, but you know what? I'm going to give it a try. And because I am going to show you at some point that I'm going to get through this. And I don't want the team to ever think that, well, this is the way things have always been done, therefore we should do it this way. Nope.
And that takes out all the possibility of what could be. It removes it, it limits it. And an organization who embraces this is the way we've always done it will be stagnant and die. I mean, there's just no opportunity to continue evolving there. There's no opportunity for exploring what's possible or what doesn't even exist yet. And it's like you just hit a brick wall.
Yeah.
All right. Well, be on the lookout, because Scot's book, Command with Courage, Elevating Beyond Adversity, is due out in the fall. So super excited to be able to get that in hands come fall time. And when that happens, I think what I'll do is actually even go back and link the ability to order it into these 2 episodes.
Oh, I love
so that
that.
people,
Thank you.
if they're listening, they're like, oh, I need to grab a copy of this. I certainly know that's what I'm going to be doing. So I would encourage everybody else to. Scot, thank you so much for coming back on for part 2 and letting us explore you and your life and your story and your leadership a little more and a little deeper.
Thank you so much, son. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening and for being here on this journey with me. I hope you'll stick around. If you liked this episode, it would mean the world for me if you would rate and review the podcast or share it with someone you know may need to hear this message. I love to hear from you all and want you to know that you can leave me a voicemail directly. If you go to my website, evokegreatness.com, and go to the Contact Me tab, you'll just hit the big old orange button and record your message. I love the feedback and comments that I've been getting, so please keep them coming. I'll leave you with the wise words of author Robin Sharma. Greatness comes by doing a few small and smart things each and every day. It comes from taking little steps consistently. It comes from making a few small chips against everything in your professional and personal life that is ordinary, so that a day eventually arrives when all that's left is the extraordinary.